thank you everybody for joining us. If you don't know me, my name is Ed Padini. I'm the head of customer success at Seacows. I'm very, very excited to be here with the fantastic and well-known Marvin Smith, who is going to share some of his very, very deep expertise in sourcing cleared candidates for the aerospace and defense industry. Marvin has over 20 years of experience in the recruiting space, including a long stint at Lockheed Martin, and many of you will know him from his participation in all manner of online recruiting events during that time. We're actually very lucky to have him as part of the Seek Out team these days, and we are super excited that he's going to be sharing his expertise with all of us today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Marvin, who is going to take us through some fantastic content for you all.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm pretty cheap. I work for Swag, so but these are cool. I saw Batman Cohen with it once, and I had apparel envy. So glad you're all here. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how we can find this scarce talent that most of us that have worked in the cleared space are looking for. I remember about 10 years ago, when I started at Lockheed, I had, made the rounds on the onboarding, and one of the TA leaders that I spoke with said something that stuck with me all this time. And his name was Kurt Hall, and I think he's still in the industry. And he told me that there are about 2,500 cleared Java developers in the DC metro area, which was an area he was focusing on. And he said the challenge with that is there's about 6,000 firms that are trying to recruit them. And I don't think much has changed over the years. That's kind of the backdrop I think that we all are challenged with is really that the demand far exceeds the talent supply. And to make it even more interesting and more challenging, the talent we're looking for is usually encouraged not to disclose that they have certain kinds of clearances. So our job is in that sector is just incredibly challenging. I've always been fascinated with technology, and I've also always been intrigued with what makes people tick. Why would somebody click on a message, and what motivates people? And today, this conversation and this presentation is really about the mix of the two. And when you mix this human touch and you mix technology, and you end up with a little bit of tension usually, and particularly when you try to do something at scale. And so, we're in a time now where we see AI on the forefront. Machine learning is very prevalent in what we do. More and more tools are becoming apparent for us today, and people and our bosses are looking for ways to leverage that technology to do more and greater work. At the same time, we're faced with a target audience of candidates that are expecting a more personalized experience, and that's really challenging. And so this is really a story about how different teams that I've worked with have approached being able to do both, deal with that tension that exists between putting a human touch into something and also using technology to leverage things. My background is, for the last 15 or 16 years, has really been in corporate recruiting. Prior to that, I was a serial contract recruiter, and before that, I had my own third-party business for quite a while. The one thing that stuck with me, that I brought with me from the third-party world, was this human touch idea. And it was really important when candidates mattered to the work that I was doing, that we gave them the kind of respect, not ignoring the client, of course, but that was always important. And the other thing that I've noticed is really a blurring of roles now. And so I use the phrase talent engagement to kind of talk about the recruiters that have to do some sourcing and identify people, and the talent sourcers who do a little bit of recruiting every once in a while. In terms of a lot of the teams I've been on, we always handled the first interview, the screening interview. So that used to be something that recruiters did. So it's kind of become blurring. And so when you think about talent engagement, it's really about understanding what drives people, what motivates people to think about, their careers and so forth. And in a marketing terms, we really are trying to find out what the target talent wants and give it to them. And we have to do this through relevant and interesting and valuable information. And so a lot of the conversation today is going to be about that. My experience at Lockheed was great. It was varied. I did a lot of work in talent communities initially. Then I moved into roles that focused on building talent pipelines and ultimately using talent engagement. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is more developing skill set approach to things as opposed to working individual requisitions. So I didn't do as much of that, probably only a year or so of working in that area. But most of my experience is around building out skill sets and thinking about how we can build relationships with those people. When I started with Lockheed, I was given a couple of different scenarios. One was how to use automation to work with a skilled labor force and use that automation to keep people warm that had already passed our security check, had already agreed to go to work with us. The jobs just weren't open yet. So one was just nurturing that talent, and I used a nifty little piece of software to do that, and that worked out well. The second was, how do we use automation to recruit cleared talent? And I came into Lockheed full of myself and with a lot of success, and at times it was pretty humbling. So my hat tip is to you guys that and I mean guys in general, work in that particular field. The one thing that I've learned is that as you go through this, there are some generalizations that we make, and one of them is that, and this was a boss of mine, Ben Martin, used these all the time, and he always said you had to slow down in order to speed up. And I used to laugh at him when he told me that. And the other one was that you can't really find all the information. You're only going to be directionally correct. And so the longer I stayed in the cleared space, the more I came to understand that, or believe that these were true. And what I did learn for certain is that there is a talent brand that we need to think about in recruiting that's completely different than our employee value proposition. So think about it this way: a talent brand is something that your candidates and your employees determine you are. You can't do much about how they think or feel about it. I mean, you can make adjustments and so forth. And we see that in Glassdoor, and we'll look at some of that data later on. And the employee value proposition is really how the corporation wants to position itself in the marketplace. And that, can change over time. But it's really a corporate message. And when you're working with target talent audiences, I found that the talent brand, the way we actually are or were at Lockheed, was more important to use in terms of trying to engage the talent that we're looking for. So we come to our first poll question, and the background to this is really the background of the setting. It's about scarce talent and how do we use different kinds of approaches. So this poll will give you an idea and kind of give me some feedback on what you folks think has worked well. It's a multiple choice, so no wrong answers. give it a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds. Close the poll in just a minute. There we go. Business advertising, partnerships. One of the things that intrigued me when at Lockheed, when you spoke to somebody that had been in the business a while, they started talking about the target audience and you know what that was like. And so if we imagine that a person that has a clearance, and I'm going to use cleared software a lot today because that's really where I did most of my research, is that the people are working in a SCIF, it's secure. If they come out for lunch, they go to a diner, and at the diner, there's chances are there's some cups that have different logos on it from the defense industry. The placemats are advertisements. You can put your card in a fishbowl and you get a chance of getting a call from a recruiter. In more recent times, I've heard of people using food trucks and all kinds of different approaches to things. So it's kind of intriguing to see, you know, what's worked, and you know, there's always this TA leader that wants to do some out of the box things to get people. In truth, I've come to understand that if we can engage somebody on a one-on-one basis, we typically are going to do a little bit better than otherwise. So today, this is kind of a roadmap of where we're going to go today. So there's just really 4 different pillars that we're going to talk about today. The first is a talent marketplace. And so I don't know about you, but sometimes when I was working a desk, I got the feeling that our talent leaders and sometimes our hiring managers especially would think that we went to a software store with cleared people, and we pushed a shopping cart around and grabbed software engineers off the shelf. And you know, it's more than that. And so I think that if you think about this target audience we have, and the fact that they work in a closed, locked environment, that they don't have a cell phone available to them to get a text message, they don't have the internet and their personal email to get an email. You know, a lot of times it's on off hours or during a commute, or you know, when they have their own private time, that we're going to be able to connect with them. And I think one of the things when we think about how to do that, it's to have quite a bit of empathy about what these folks are going through. One of the things that's really become clear with tools like Seek Out is we all have access to the same information. And the challenge that we have, I think, is discovering all the potential talent that's available for us, and to use certain techniques to find it. That's a discriminator today, as opposed to in the past, it might have been our ability to do the research to find the people. And you know, we go to SourceCon, and we go to ERE, and we go to HR Tech, TX, and we go to all these different conferences. And a lot of the speakers are all focused on talent data, which is cool. And there's some really amazing people at finding people. But the truth is, for most of us, we don't have time to learn those new tools or techniques to do it. We need a platform that allows us to do these things seamlessly, fit into our method of working, and add some value that way. I would argue that we're better off spending more time in the talent marketplace, understanding what people need and using that to engage people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And the talent engagement is I think where we can distinguish ourselves. This is kind of the secret sauce that many of us has discovered. Changing the way that we engage talent um, at Lockheed, in most cases, we resulted in about a 300% increase in our success. So it's something that is ongoing and was quite revealing to us in terms of spending more time engaging people and how we engage people. And then once you've got the talent, you need to evaluate it and decide what to do with that person. And a lot of times it's, you know, if they're available now, we'll push them into a candidate slate. If they're not available now or didn't answer our email, then we push them into a pipeline that we can nurture a relationship. We need to keep them in orbit around a brand. We spent time and money and effort to identify the people, and just, you know, the days of a one and done type of approach just don't work anymore. We need to be able to leverage that. I think the next frontier that we're going to reach in talent engagement is really how do we maintain a long-term relationship with talent, perhaps even over the whole life cycle of their career. So if we have to slow down to speed up, if we have to use information or use processes that are directionally correct, and if we have to think about our talent brand as opposed to you know, thinking about the employee value proposition and all the great content that typically recruitment marketing puts out, but it doesn't always relate directly to what a candidate needs. You know, we need to stop and do some soul searching. And one of the things that, when you think about the talent engagement process, is I really don't have time to do this. And I have 50 open requisitions, and I have, you know, 5 hiring managers with their hair on fire. And, you know, I've been there, and I've been in those roles where you actually are practicing energized incompetence. You know, you're just going from one to the other. I used to refer to it as whack-a-mole recruiting, because it was just, you know, we had to put fires out. And my goal today is to suggest that there's a different way, a better way. If you slow down and do some of the things we're talking about, and see that we can never really get perfection on the data or the metrics that we're collecting, but if we can assure that it's 80 or 90% correct, then we need to move ahead. And we should focus on that talent brand as we engage people. So that's where we're going today. The talent marketplace. If you look at the screenshot here, it's really made up of several things. One is that you have this gathering intelligence on the consumer, and on the other hand, you have a client that you need to please. You know, it's kind of like being Switzerland, right? You have both parties that want to control things, and both want you to put their needs first, and we have to keep everybody happy. So I sometimes think of this as having 2 customers. You know, that one customer that's a hiring manager is more of a B2B, a business to business kind of customer. And that's a different approach to maintain that relationship than a B2C relationship, which is really what I've come to understand that a candidate is, that they really act like customers. And I think if you think about all the work that the Talent Board and the Candidate Experience Awards have done, they have really drilled into us that truly that job prospect is a consumer and wants to be treated like a consumer. It's forced us to change a lot of what we do. We now think about you know, the talent and what they want, and what's going to motivate them to do things, as opposed to just what we want as a company. Because frankly, I don't think they care until they become an employee and buy into the mission and so forth. So talent intelligence is about the talent landscape. So where the talent works right now. The talent, it's about talent mapping and understanding what locations the target talent lives. It's about information on the attributes and motivations of this target audience. Um, and it's a chance um, to think about this talent brand in terms of your talent is probably going to go to Glassdoor or a site like a review site like that and read about us. And I think that's really important. One of my favorite people in recruiting is Carmen Hudson, and she has just an amazing presentation that she does on the client strategy meeting and what to bring to the client strategy meeting and how to prepare for that and to really come prepared to become that talent advisor and not just come in and take notes and not push back. So if you have a chance to catch any of her videos on how to do that, I recommend you do it. It's quite remarkable. The end result for me out of a strategy meeting is really a checklist, we call it a talent sourcing roadmap, but it's basically the databases that we should be able to search. It's about the platforms that we can use to find these people. It's about the professional associations. It's about lists. It's about ideas where we can find the people. And we take that information and we go into the next part of the process, which is the data and using that in the data mining. I put this in because it's one of my favorite quotes, and I do this to remind myself that it's really in terms of the first pillar that we're working with is to make it about them and not about us. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in organizations is how do you become what they want as opposed to what we want, and it's I think of it as the within era, what's in it for me kind of era, and we saw that change somewhere around 2012 or 2013, somewhere in there. Everything sort of changed in the web activities, and it became about them. The talent data is, I think, a place that we can really make some headway. It's an area where I always used a variety of sources. I used Seek Out. I used our CRM. I used our ATS. I used resume databases like Clearance Jobs. A number of different sources were useful in that. And what we tried to do was to bring all those sources together, aggregate that data, and then clean it. And I can't emphasize that enough. Is you need to make sure of what you're sending out. Take a few minutes and make sure that we're not sending somebody with a name that has all caps on it, or sending it with somebody that's all lowercase. You need to, even though it's a mass mailing and people know it's a mass mailing, it doesn't need to look like one. So we try to move through it, and ultimately what we're doing is taking that data and transforming it into a person, and that's when the fun begins. Put this in as just a reminder. John Velasquelica is one of my favorite folks. It looks like I'm touting Recruiting Toolbox today, doesn't it? And I really like what he has to say here, because it really speaks to what we're talking about today. It's really hard to engage the people because and all the competition, and it really makes sense. So talent engagement. The days of those awesome emails are gone. And what I mean by an awesome email, you've probably seen them, and like me, you may have even written them, where you say to the target talent, you have an awesome background. I've got an awesome job. I'm an awesome recruiter. why don't you interview with us and everybody will be awesome together. And, I think honestly, we need to put some of the talent intelligence to work. I think we need to craft messages around what the target audience is looking for. And frankly, we use storytelling. We told stories about a career or different kinds of messages, and would tell that story over 4 or 5 messages and drive the engagement there. And the idea being that we're really faced with a challenge today in email, in that the average person probably gets between, I've seen data that says between 120 and 127 emails a day. They take about 15 seconds total time to make a decision on whether they're going to open that email. And so sometimes you need to do the multiple emails to get through sort of the noise in an inbox. One of my discoveries was Jillian Nye, who uses empathy in marketing, and she writes a lot about it. She's done a lot of research on what works to engage people and so forth. And she just reminds us that, we don't need to talk about ourselves all the time. We need to provide some value to the people that we're working. And sometimes that value isn't a job, even though that's what our job is. Sometimes that value is other things, how to be helpful in their career and those kind of things. There's a book called Building a Story Brand, and Donald Miller is an author that I've read in the past, and he kind of pivoted into this area and really tells the story of how to build story around your brand and who the hero is and of the story. And I think a lot of times our employee value proposition thinks that your brand is the hero of the story, and the talent brand would say that the hero of the story is the target audience, the talent that we're trying to get. And so that's why I sort of lean toward that. It tends to work well in the last bit. So, and we come to the last phase of this, and this is really where it all comes together. You've sent out your messages, you're getting the results of it, and frankly, we live in an era where if the expected results of somebody wanting to talk to us is probably 2 to 6% of the people that you target. So I think it's important to think about how large an audience you need to engage, how you need to engage them, and then set the expectations. I found and learned from my colleagues that the best way to screen somebody is to spend the time during your interview not talking about a job, and compliance enters into that, why we don't do that. We're prospectors at that stage. But talk to them about their career aspirations. What's the trajectory of their career that they want to follow? What's the next steps? Finding out whether our organization is a place that you can map their skills to. And again, I say the next frontier is really how do we provide value over the long term? Yeah, relevant and valuable content, I think, is going to be part of the answer. So let's dive into a case study that we can walk through that was an experience that I had multiple times at Lockheed. And so the first place we start, of course, is the talent marketplace. And again, we're trying to remember that there's 2 customers, the B2B customer, which is a hiring manager, the B2C customer, which is the target talent. And a lot of what we need to do is, or we found we needed to do, was to take a look at the personas. We looked a lot at survey information that was available to us for software engineers. There's some excellent, and we took the approach that that information was directionally correct, and we used that information in our talent engagement efforts. So this is a screenshot from Seek Out, and it's on software engineers, and it shows you where they work right now. And Seek Out has about, I think, a dozen other visual aids that you can use under the Insights tab that help you when you go into the meetings with your hiring managers. It's one thing to tell them, it's another thing to show them. And we had really good traction when we went into a meeting and just showed them the data, and being engineers, they like that and relate to it. So just a couple of the surveys that are here. There's probably a dozen or so that are useful. My adventure with this started with Stack Overflow, and I started reading their annual surveys probably 5 years ago. And in some of the previous ones, they went so far as to say the kinds of words that would attract a software engineer, which ones they would be more like. It's fascinating when you dive into it. You can tell I'm a bit of a data geek, but it worked out really well. So if we think about the drivers, what makes somebody move positions? Why would they look in other roles? And rather than go through all of them, I've highlighted just a handful that we pulled out. And the reason we took these drivers is we felt like we needed to understand what would motivate a software engineer to move positions. And we didn't want to make it about compensation, because I'm not sure in the defense industry we can win at that. So we had to find other things within their value set that would cause them to make a move. And so we used learning and career development as really one of the principal efforts in our outreach. We also found out that there's a difference between what motivates a person to be attracted to another job and a person that is frustrated and wants to leave a job. There's really two different lists. There's some overlap, but it was kind of interesting to think about somebody moving towards something and somebody moving away from something, and that was a bit of an enlightenment we had. And so we pulled out these four things that relate back to the first one. So then we decided, well, what do people think about us? What's it like to work at Lockheed Martin? So we went to Glassdoor and read, kind of the work-life balance and so forth. And I'm pretty sure that every defense company I've worked or read their Glassdoor information says pretty much the same thing about work-life balance. We're all pretty competitive about that. And then I did a deeper dive and looked at information that Glassdoor had about employees that work at Lockheed Martin and how they felt about us. And so I wanted to see what kinds of things we could focus on in our campaigns that would be relevant and valuable to those folks and be motivational and so forth. So there's about 456 people that were employees that were software engineers that shared their information on Glassdoor, and that helped drive it. I will say that I also took an opportunity to get some private data from internal Lockheed Martin surveys. So every 2 years or so, we had a survey that talks about, our likes and dislikes, and sort of rates the overall trends of what's going on in the corporation. And so I was able to get that information for software engineers that isolated their just their feelings and attributes and what they liked and didn't like. And I used that in the messaging as well. And that was very valuable. So your organization probably does something like that. You might be interested to see if they break it out by job class. So I would go into a strategy meeting and I would take the visuals and I would take, literally the lists of what people are looking for and what what kinds of things people valued, and sort of calibrate with that. In other words, I kind of turned that strategy meeting into a marketing meeting and tried to partner with the hiring manager to understand, how can we better position ourselves or market ourselves, and in order to get the talent that we're looking for. So when you think about slowing down and all of those kinds of things, I encourage people to do the research. Now, when you think about it, you only have to do it once and sort of monitor the trends. You don't have to spend all day geeking out on what somebody thinks or feels about certain things. It's more directionally correct. You find the trend and monitor it. I used a lot of Gartner information, which is really neat. It goes very deep into even the aerospace and defense industry, and will tell you, sort of the percentage of people that are actively looking by engineering title or software, whatever. It's pretty powerful. And so we use all of that to build the messaging around the talent brand. So before we talk about data, let's have you guess on how many cleared candidates can you find on Seek Out. So this is just going to Seek Out, going to your instance, putting in, people who have clearances, and how many people do you think that is? These are people that put their clearance on their profile. My colleague Kelsey is the poll master, so we'll allow her to do it now. Okay. There's pretty sharp people here in terms of how many people. The correct answer is 362,500. So the next poll question is, if you use the inferred clearance, so Seek Out on their instances that for the expert license, we've done some work on clearances, and if you use that particular filter, how many people will you see? And the answer will be above 362,000. So what's everybody think? Let Kelsey manage controls the poll when we get there. Cool. It was a 2.6 that caused everybody to lean that way. 2.6 million profiles of people that have clearances that were inferred. We'll talk a little bit more about how we got there. So let's talk a little bit about the data and where it comes from. So we use data from Seek Out. We use data from our ATS. We use data from our CRM. We use data from resume job sites like Clearance Jobs. We use some of the other job boards, but mostly it was, we were trying to find the people that already had clearances and had declared it. So that's basically what we went through. And to be honest, I didn't know. I had great success using Seek Out with the inferred clearances, but I had no knowledge until I prepared for this class in terms of how much data was available, through the platform. And so and it's kind of interesting how Seek Out went about this. So the idea is that we're going to infer a clearance by looking at the jobs that the people have today. So they went back through, I think it was 25 million job posts in the past, looked at the job titles, and then determined how many people were in that job, and inferred, again, directionally correct, that these people would have those kind of skills. So I broke it down a little more just to give you the idea, because it was just, I was going through this and I go, wow. And I honestly, I didn't know that there were two levels of licenses, because we always had the expert. So I didn't know any better. But so some of you, if I'm not in sales, but to me, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. If you're not using that expert license, I mean, this is data just for software engineers, and so there's, there might be a gain that you can make there. So when you think about, slow down to speed up and directionally correct, an area that became apparent to me as I was working working a desk, was that we've forgotten to tell our TA managers and our hiring managers how long it takes to find somebody, that time to find a person. And so I've done some research, because it was kind of frustrating that, in the shopping cart model, they really thought it was, we could go and pull somebody off a shelf. And this data is from Lever, and they spent some time analyzing how long it takes to find people. And they focus a lot on tech talent with their customer base. And you get an idea that a lot of time is going to be invested. It's not, the whack-a-mole approach doesn't always work. I went to Mike Cohen and asked him, because of the model he uses, and he runs almost like agile sprints every couple of weeks to find people. And I said, well, how many people do you have to look at? How many profiles do you have to review and get, a couple of hundred of them that fits into your model? And how much time does it take you? And this is the feedback he gave me. So you get the idea that, we need to start telling people that it's going to take some time to find these folks. The second thing that we need to do, I think, is to think about how many people it's going to take to fill our funnel. These numbers are a couple of years old. Johnny Campbell over at Socio Talent used to put out surveys. He surveyed the worldwide audience, but this was US numbers, and this is kind of how many people you have to start with. So if you have to start with 250 people to get a hire, we need to think about that as we go through things. So I guess my word of advice is that, think a little bit larger in terms of people. So the next piece is really the engagement piece, and this was really good for us. And what we did was we used empathetic marketing. We took Jillian Nye's approach, and we started with, there's a moment of reflection. There's a time when somebody is thinking about changing jobs. They haven't taken any action, and what are those times that happen in life that cause them to do it? And then we wanted to hook them in with what they're thinking about that time. So we're going to use the subject line to do that. And the data tells us that we have about 3 seconds to get their attention with the subject line. We want to know what they're feeling. So we want to use the pitch, the content to create interest in them. And the whole point is to bring them to take some action. And so, and we have about 7 seconds in the process to do that. So this is a list that was compiled out of different resources that Intello and different people have commented over the years on LinkedIn. These are days that people, so I always like to start this time of year with New Year's resolution. And so if you took that approach and, and we've used different approaches thinking about a career checkup, and, it's the end of the year and people kind of thinking about, well, what did I what progress did I make? And we grabbed those drivers that we talked about, the motivation and also the reason for leaving, and we lumped them all together. And then we crafted messages, and you'll get a copy of this, so I'm not going to go through each one, but I think you'll see in the detail how we told this story going from place to place to place, and the fear of missing out, boy, that really worked well in 2 or 3 different settings that we used this approach. We didn't use the same message. We told, slightly different stories and so forth, but it really worked well for us. So to kind of summarize and answer some of your questions, do you have any? Let me just sort of pause here and say, we need to slow down to speed up, because we need to know our target audience. We need to invest time in what makes them tick. And it really will be beneficial for you if you take this approach. The second thing we're trying to do is we want to make sure that we're directionally correct on what we're doing, not just the attributes and the data we see from that, but the data that we're getting from tools like Seek Out. Nothing is perfect at this point. A lot of the data we use is built on LinkedIn public profile data. So it really is how much information the prospect that fills out the profile is willing to say. I found, and my colleagues found, that using Seek Out data with email addresses, we were about 85 to 90% accurate on clearances and on emails. We did have to, do some extra work on getting the emails when it was obvious that, and we try to stay away from work emails, to be honest with you. We felt that's, because of the industry we're in, and a lot of us are frenemies. We tried to be cool about that. And then finally, it's really about engagement and building that talent brand and help, making sure that it's about them and not about us. I love this quote from you just remember that people will remember how you made them feel. So it's time to win some gear. So one question that's out there for everybody, and looks like it's really difficult. So Kelsey will put your name in a hat, and so to speak, and people with the correct answer will have a shot at this wonderful, it's wintertime out here, and so this gear is really comfortable. So what do you think? Send 3 emails. How many more responses will you get? 100% or 50%?
Okay, we are going to close the poll now.
Whoever chose 100% is in a good area to win something.
very exciting. Kelsey is just going to get ready to get a winner for us, but this has been fantastic, Marvin. Thank you so much for taking us through everything so far. I think it's been a super informative session. Hopefully everybody on the call today agrees. We're all waiting with bated breath. Are there any last minute questions? Anything that anybody would like us to come back to, or would like Marvin to talk about in a little bit more detail while we're waiting on our lucky winners? If there's anybody on the call that's not a Seek Out customer at the moment, or perhaps if you are, but you'd like to spend a little bit more time looking at how cleared sourcing works at Seek Out, or want to know more about how we're inferring these skills, please feel free to be in touch. We've got a URL that Marvin's going to show, seekout.com/cleared. We can get you a demo, we can get you a trial, we can connect you with your customer success manager to dig into all of these things in more detail. We are always here to help. Thank you, Kelsey. That's fantastic. We're going to be in touch. Everybody who won a sweater, you'll get an email from us, and we'll get some details from you, and we'll get those shipped right out. You can join Marvin in modeling our fantastic gear.
Absolutely.
Marvin, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I think that one of the things that drip marketing was really something that was game-changing for us. The ability to iteratively engage somebody, and whether you're using our Seek Out platform and engaging people with 4 or 5 different messages, or you have your own CRM, I really recommend you do that. It's something about getting through all the barriers that we put up, and our short attention spans and all those kind of things, that ongoing message. And what we found at the end is the last message, when you break up with them, was the most interesting. You got more responses that were going, whoa, what happened? Why I didn't have time on the others. And so we found when going to a cadence of about 5 messages worked better than just doing one. So look forward to it, and try it. It's all kind of a big experiment, but do some stories around it. Don't ever make everything about a job and us. Make it about them.
Fantastic advice. Couldn't agree more. And for everybody on the call today, and everybody who registered but couldn't make it, we are going to share this video. We will get you an email with some more info. We'd love to talk to you about cleared sourcing or candidate engagement in general, or anything else that we can help you with at Seek Out. So thank you for your time. Marvin, really appreciate all the time and effort you put into this. It was absolutely fantastic. And we look forward to seeing you all over the coming days and weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.